But the world's fifth largest global economy, India, saw its rank of billionaires swell to 166 in 2021 from 102 just a year ago. There's been a sharp increase in the number of billionaires in India during the Covid-inflicted years, which saw 60% of the country's wealth getting accumulated under the ownership of 5% of the richest Indians. You know, of all the podcasts, or the best of podcasts that we've done on this show, Neil, no podcast has actually been more popular than when we spoke to one of the lead financial advisors of Gautam Adani, and suddenly we saw the spike jump on all of our shows because people are fascinated, I guess, not only by his wealth, but the story coming out of India of just the growth of so many billionaires.
Well, see, I mean, one thing that one will agree with the fact that India is the country that the world is looking at, with the kind of population that India has, and the population which is extremely young. If I'm not mistaken, as per the stats, India is the youngest country as far as the average age is concerned in the world. So why wouldn't one want to invest and reap the benefits from the youngest economy?
Well, to get more details, we're joined by investment advisor and wealth manager from Continental Group International, Abhishek Datta. Thank you very much for joining us here on TSB.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you in here. We're seeing this statistic, the rank of billionaires swells, as now 1% of Indians own 40% of the total wealth in a country. Yeah, we've spoken about this before. You know, we're obviously fans of capitalism, and we're fans of enterprise and entrepreneurship. But at what point does it become dangerous socially, where you've got so much wealth that is owned by so few people?
I think it's the question you're asking me, every economist in the world worth his salt is trying to solve. But it's not as simple as it looks. I mean, let's be honest, being an entrepreneur isn't easy. I'm an entrepreneur, and I know sometimes how difficult it is taking those risks, having those sleepless nights, running a business. And sometimes you have to also applaud the fact that these people have done those things at the right time, at the right, space. But yes, it is a problem. The wealth gap is growing all over the world. It's not just India. Today, India is in focus because it's the fifth or the fourth largest economy, depends on who you ask. But it's also a place that's growing constantly. We've been subdued. Our growth has been subdued over the last few years. But I think it's the right time to start looking at India differently, because a lot of factors, like you mentioned some time back, the youngest population, the access to capital, the government reforms that are coming in, it's all helped these things. It's not just when you say it like that it's all concentrated on very few people. Yes, but those people have tried their best to make money, and they've invested in the country. It will help the country grow eventually, is what I believe. When I was in Barcelona, I saw the Sagrada Familia. It's still not complete, right? It's 126 years and still not complete. And when you're laying one brick, at that point of time, some people have that vision that they're just laying a brick, but someone is thinking you're building a marvel over 100 years. So I think we are at that stage where bricks are being laid. But yeah, I think it's a problem that needs to be solved eventually.
Kitch and I were talking about this, and it was like, that even if we were to do a reset of sorts, where whatever the wealth is there in the world is equally distributed amongst everyone, a few decades down, probably 100 years down or 200 years down, there still will be a divide that'll come through, because some people know how to manage wealth, and some people don't know. Probably they get a few $1 million in their pocket and they'll squander it off, and a few years down they'll still be back on the roads and looking for money.
Correct. I think it's if you were to distribute wealth equally, you're talking about a form of government which is not very popular in the world today anymore, and it hasn't worked. It doesn't work.
It won't.
If I give you free money today, you'll probably squander it. Exactly. 99% of the time, people squander it.
How many people that generally win sort of the jackpots and the lottos?
Right.
It's amazing how many of them have ruined their lives within 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, can you name one jackpot winner whose family today is also rich?
Yeah, no,
right? I mean, nobody knows that person. Because when it comes easy, it goes easy as well. And I've seen that in my field as well. When people make money through hard work, through dedication, they understand the value of it. But if you give someone free money, I don't think that's the solution. The solution is, I think, more deeper. education, for example, the access to education should not depend on your financial circumstance.
Right.
And that will probably change, that will automatically bring equality in education. If that happens, automatically opportunities will be equal for everyone. So that's one way of, I think, distributing wealth in the long run.
I'll turn this statement around and say, you mentioned, education for all, irrespective of your financial status. How important is financial education at the absolute grassroots level? Like I've not studied finance. Okay, I come from the science stream, and then I went on to study something absolutely, core science. I've not studied finance. I don't understand accountancy, debit what comes in, credit what goes out, or is it the other way around? I don't know. How can a financially illiterate person, let me use that term because I haven't studied finance, make wealth when it's not been taught to him?
I think that's a very fair point, which is why the professional financial advisors exist, because all we are taught in school, in university, is how to make money, not how to save it or invest it or grow
wealth.
it or even preserve it for that matter.
True.
Indian households, for example, don't even talk about money very openly because it's a very taboo topic, it's a sensitive topic. So I think that part is becoming more and more prevalent. Some educational institutions have learned that it's important to teach kids about money, not just about how to make money. So I think there's progress in that aspect for sure.
Well, one of the issues about this is that Oxfam is a British-founded confederation of 21 independent charitable organisations. They've released a report called Survival of the Richest, and they've released this as the World Economic Forum is going on. What they're asking is India's finance minister to put levy a wealth tax on this ultra-risk to tackle the obscene inequality, pointing out that the poor in India are unable to afford basic necessities. It's a question that every country is dealing with. Do you have any thoughts on this as to whether this will work in India or whether it's something that there are other systems that have been in place in other countries that could possibly work better?
So a lot of countries, including the United States, are talking about this, the rich keep getting richer, and so let's tax them. But do you want to also stifle entrepreneurship? Do you want to discourage people from getting rich? Because I think a better system would be how you distribute that wealth by creating employment, how the rich people create employment and distribute that wealth rather than, not encourage them to do that. And also, why are not more people not investing in those companies? Now, if you invested with a lot of the billionaires in India in their companies, you would also make a lot of money over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, the education when it comes to financial education. If they were investing in the stock markets instead of keeping their money in the bank or buying gold with it, they would be making more money. They would be able to participate in the growth of that billionaire.
Yeah, so we have the same issue. I'm Australian. We have the world's richest woman. Her name's Gina Reinhart. She's worth $28 billion US. And most of that's come through iron ore, which is taken out of the ground and is sold to most of the manufacturing that's going in Asia. And the argument comes in, well, why aren't the government doing the mining? And that money could be put back in. But also, should we do a super profits tax? Why can't we tax this? But also, you're looking that she employs so many people. Right. And they're paying so much income tax. Yeah. And then she's paying payroll tax. And then she's also paying, and they're spending all their money that she's employing and putting back into the economy. So it's very easy to target that pointy end.
Correct.
Rather than look at the bottom of the pyramid.
Correct. And also, how many governments are good at running businesses?
Well, that is so true.
Right?
Yes.
And at the same time, what's more important is the accountability of where the tax revenue is going.
Fair.
The middle class in India, for example, pays 60% of all the taxes. But how is that tax revenue benefiting the middle class? So those are questions that need to be answered more than who's paying the tax.
It is, but then when you look at the standard of living, it seems to be, from a government point of view, the highest standard of living do tend to be in countries with smaller populations, because there just seems to be a far more even distribution of wealth.
Plus, it's easier to manage, right?
Of course.
I mean, a smaller population is like a smaller house, right? It's easier to clean the nooks and corners. You have an 8-bedroom villa with even if you have 10 people working, you have an 8-bedroom villa with even if you have 10 people working, it will take that time and effort. Now, whatever the challenges we face today with, the disparity in wealth distribution and all of that, as an individual, I would be a little selfish and think about myself first versus thinking about the billionaires, where probably maybe someday I'll reach there, or probably, someone who doesn't have, probably a bread on his table. Now, for me, my objective here is to create wealth.
Correct.
Whatever I'm making is an X amount, and there is a finite, source of income and a finite income that will come every month to everyone who's working at whatever level. What do you do to that money so that the money works for you and not you working for the money?
Save and invest. There's no other way. I don't know. Even a billionaire invests. A billionaire plans his finances. He just doesn't run his business, go home and get a good night's sleep.
Right.
He goes home, manages that money very, very well. And when you have a finite income, it is even more important. Now, we are all privileged to be in this country where we have access to all the financial instruments in the world. All the financial products are open to us. You couldn't do that in Europe or in the United States. You would be restricted on what you could do.
Okay.
But here you are open to that. You do not pay income tax.
Right. That's the biggest advantage.
So are you saving that amount? If you're not, then you're doing yourself a disservice. We complain about taxes in our home countries, but we aren't saving or investing that part when we are here.
That's a very, very interesting point that you make here.
You don't even pay capital gains tax.
Right.
In India, if you were making money on stocks or anything, even if you're buying property, selling property, you would be paying capital gains tax. You don't even pay that here.
Yeah, but
despite that, you don't invest.
I think that's a bigger attraction than the income tax, because whilst you're not paying income tax, you do generally pay more for things. At least I find than back home.
Maybe, but I tend to point out, but when you pay for something here, you get it. There's no guarantee, especially back home, that even if I pay for something, I'll get quality service. I'm being very honest here.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's important to look at things from a broader perspective.
When you say home, you mean back in India?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you see, I'm looking at it back coming from the West, that the goods, most things are twice as expensive in the UAE that are the same products as back home.
Also because most of the products back home are manufactured or produced within the country. UAE doesn't produce a lot of things, right? Wheat, fruit, vegetable, all of these things are generally imported. You go to a supermarket, you will see oranges from Pakistan, carrots from Egypt, tomatoes from Spain. So, there is a certain amount of import that goes through there.
Yeah. No, of course. So that adds to the cost.
Exactly.
That adds to the cost. And I agree.
Yeah, but then there's also unionised labour, which makes goods far more expensive in certain countries that you don't have here as well.
True.
It balances out.
It does. I mean, but see, like I'm saying, even, for example, Australia or any out of the Western countries, they give a lot of benefits to the population.
That's true.
But how long will they be able to afford that?
Well,
most of the governments are running in deficit in the world.
Of course.
So how long do you think those benefits will last? A lot of people I meet here are keep quoting that my healthcare is taken care of back in Europe or in the US or Canada for whatever. But at the end of the day, those benefits are going to dry up because the governments just don't have the money.
Yeah, and then you also have those other governments, whilst they're going into debt, still have to fund other smaller countries that aren't able, that aren't able to fund themselves.
So that brings back to the question that when you give out free money, it's not really free. I mean, you're distributing wealth, but it doesn't work because you're taking it from one place and giving it to someone else.
Yeah, but that becomes down the rise of China, doesn't it? That everyone's been borrowing off them for so long.
True.
And then suddenly they're in debt. But it's a fascinating conversation when you look at the growth of certainly of Indian billionaires. But on a positive note, does this change the way? And Neil's touched on this. Does this change the way the Indian economy is now seen?
It does. So India is about 4% of the world GDP, which is very small compared to the percentage of the population of India in respect to the world. It can only grow from here. And all said and done, the government policies have helped. The access to credit, banks have become more efficient. A lot of the bad debts on the books of banks have been taken care of. So it makes the economy as a whole more efficient. Of course, there's still room for improvement. There's still, capital needs to find its way to every entrepreneur out there who wants to, grow their business. If that happens in the next 10, 15 odd years, there is no stopping India. In the whole space of investing in the world, you would have to look at India in your portfolio. If it's 3% of the world GDP or 4% of the world GDP, 4% of your money has to be invested in India. It's as simple as that. If you're not investing in India, you're missing out on growth.
And when you're looking at the industries that most of those billionaires are coming from, where are they coming from? Is it manufacturing and healthcare?
Correct.
Which is rather unusual because most economies are seeing them in generally real estate
Right.
that you'd find probably in the United States, real estate or in mining, or then you're seeing the rise of a lot of the software and the tech billionaires.
Correct.
Why has healthcare been such a huge player?
So, India's generally got great intellectual capital, but what has always prevented them is good manufacturing practices, access to energy. Constant electricity has been a challenge over the last few decades.
Sure.
But now that's improved, and now there's a lot of the patents have opened up for a lot of generic medicines.
Yeah.
So which is what has improved and given access to all these Indian manufacturers who manufacture these medicines at a fraction of the cost of the West. So it automatically opens up the market for India. Manufacturing as well, again, access to electricity and access to cheap labor is very
Huge play.
under, people don't look at it as something which is very important.
No, it's a huge thing. The amount of industries that have been killed off certainly in North America,
Correct.
on the back of companies are moving to non-unionized labour across the rest of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and also everyone was dependent on China for all their manufacturing needs. That needs to be moved away. They need to hedge their bets as well. So they need access to low-cost manufacturing and good quality practices, and that they're getting that in India today.
So, I mean, India, for whatever is required in India, with that kind of size of population, if you are able to deliver that for that population itself, you will be amongst the top 10 in the country.
Even if you can tap 1% of the population.
You're right.
Yeah.
It's a sizable market.
It is
for
a sizable market.
Well, look, I mean, it's the same as China. We look at Apple as being this $1 trillion company, but they still only have sub 10% phone market share in China.
Correct.
Compared to Huawei. And that's one of the reasons Apple have been so trying to get into the Chinese market, at least pre-COVID, because we look at how big they are, but they're still only a small part of the Chinese plan, which goes into sort of businesses need to get into India, as you said, 4%.
Absolutely.
4% is an interesting point.
There is one interesting story about the influx of foreign businesses coming into India, and they found a gateway not through regular business channels, but by making beauty queens out of Indian women. Miss Universe, Miss World, there was a barrage of Indian beauty queens happening in the mid-90s when the doors opened for foreign investments, and all of a sudden you saw there were at least half a dozen Indian models becoming Miss Worlds and Miss Universes. Why? Because they come in, they bring in the international brands, and those international brands are endorsed by these girls, and thus the aspirational population of India wants to follow them, and thus the requirement for the brand increases. That was a fantastic case study that if one has to understand that you find a little window inside India,
Right.
and you will start creating ripples for your own brands in the country.
True.
It's a great point. Well, Abhishek Datta, thank you very much for coming in and sharing
Thank
your
you.
expertise this afternoon. He's from Continental Group International, the investment advisor and wealth manager. You're on TSB, Talk Sport Business.